King Otalle was downed, bleeding, while all about him brayed death. On either hand his retinue lay slain, pierced and hacked, their faces trodden to the mud. At his back, as he lay against its ribs, his faithful mount breathed its last, its doughty heart drained to one last feeble drumbeat. In his lap, as his own blood pooled, the spear which had pierced him still jutted from his thigh, his groin rent by its crude blade. In his hand, as the vile Thurga bent to the kill, he gripped the royal sword, Dramvoppen afore in defiance, its lustre dimmed as at the nearness of death. Far ahead of aid had the King of Vestalanta ridden, deep into the battle, his elite cavalry about him, to further break a seeming broken foe. He had not anticipated such devious treachery of monsters as mindless as the Thurga, the fleeing lure, the closing snare, the butchery of spears against horseflesh, the murder of the cream of his might. And now, too, his own end assured. A moment of history it was, when the fates of families and lineages and kingdoms balanced upon a knife's point. "Come, draw nigh my blade, you devils," he cried to the Thurga hunched close about, their spear points in ready reach of his heart. Yet they made no move to finish him, content to hold him there, unnecessary though that proved. So wounded, Otalle could not even stand, let alone fight or flee. Hideous were the Thurga, giants of the northern wastes, half as tall again as any man, their skin grey as the stone they scratched upon for survival, their long lank hair white as bleached bone, their empty eyes white as steel, the only colour upon their cruel faces the yellowed flash of fangs as they snarled and gnashed their rabid furies. Eaters of men they were. The rude hides and pelts they wore as garments, strung with the skulls of their victims. Savage their weapons, spears of flint, clubs of wood, cudgels of antler, slings of sinew. Nor did they don armour, their own beaten skin hard as weathered leather. They spoke no tongue understood by any man, yet Otalle knew well enough that the press of foe jeered and mocked and scorned, and though he doubted that they could know the meaning of his words, still he felt compelled to cry out, rather than lie in the dirt, bleeding, helpless, with his chivalry dead and broken all about him. "By Taranos," he swore, "I will end you all, you godless devils." Why the Thurga had not yet slaughtered the king soon became clear. Their ranks parted, and forth strode a giant even amongst that race of giants. At first glance Otalle guessed him, for he could be none other than he who rumour named Gormal, their recent risen chief, and author of the latest atrocities of this ancient foe. Fangs flashing wide, his crooked scowl rife with glee, the Thurga chieftain stalked near, massive club raised for the killing stroke, the glory of conquest saved for him by underlings cowed before his barbarous strength. Otalle closed his eyes. He did not wish his last mortal sight to be the victory of that grotesque monster. He thought of his fair queen Gwyndolaine, and his 2 sons, still babes in arms. Tears welled to his eyes, not for the certainty of his own fate, but for the doubt of theirs. Otalle began to pray, and the gods, as they are wont, made answer. Otalle felt a thud at his back, as if the heart of his slain steed did beat once again. Yet it was a heavy boot, hard upon the carcass, used as a springboard to the scrum. As he looked up, the king saw a young warrior leap over his head to land betwixt him and the advancing chieftain. The warrior lighted deft as a Highland cat, his blade raining blows before him, his bright crimson hair blown behind like a banner of flame. Striking with sword in his right and shield in his left, the young man beat the hulking giant back a good yard, then upraised his blade with challenging cry. A clamour spread amongst the Thurga, and Gormal regained his will and stood fast, brandishing his own weapon in reply. He cried out a garbled slur, intelligible even from that barbarous moor. "Ketun," slavered Gormal in ageless hate. "Eotun," cried the flame-haired warrior, undaunted. For here stood 2 enemies of a war old as time, brave wildling of the plains of Khetaine against savage marauder of the mountains grim, man against monster. And though as individuals these 2 combatants had never before met, Each greeted the other as mortal foe, with zealotry aeons earned. Gormal hulked forward, his fearsome club arcing down with the force of a tree trunk's fall. The young man of Khetaine did not balk, raising his shield high to the strike. The impact bruited across the battlefield, and sure it seemed that his shield arm must break beneath the colossal blow. But of a different order of men was the youth of Khetaine, and though not yet fully a man, he threw shield up and club aside and struck hard with his sword, gouging deep into the giant's hip. Gormal roared in agony, catching at his foe with his free hand. The youth allowed himself to be seized, as his blade sought a different target, and with a dazzling strike his sword flashed up through the Thurga's exposed weapon arm. Edge cleaved tendons to bone, and the chieftain's cudgel fell, thudding to the mud. His ligaments severed, his fingers useless. Again struck the warrior, and again, sword glittering as bolts of heaven, and, braying in terror, Gormal turned and fled. But, held pinned by the press of his own underlings, there was no escaping fury nor fate. His legs were hacked from beneath him at the knee, and as he slumped, steel sang again, and away came Gormal's head in a single seething stroke. With the death of their chieftain, the crowding Thurga quailed and broke. Panic spread as a blaze in tinder-dry grass, and in an instant the whole mass reeled in flight. The tide turned, beaten back by one man alone, or so it seemed. Though even at that moment more men of Vestolanta charged nigh from behind, spears and axes borne down upon the backs of the routing giants. As one in a dream, Otalle watched the warrior with the hair of fire, pressing ever deeper into the slaughter before losing sight of him in the tumult. "My king, you are alive!" came a familiar voice rejoicing in his ear, as nigh rushed his nephew, Prince Healdred. "Get after them!" barked the king, his chiselled cheeks bloodless white with pain. "Yield them no quarter! Kill them all!" "The Huskarls offer pursuit, mine uncle," said Healdred. "They know their duty. We must get you to aid." A litter being made, the wounded king was carried back behind the battle lines to the luggage, where he was made comfortable in the royal tent, tended by his personal chirurgeon and an Erishalan physic. The bitter wounds to his groin grieved him, and he felt much weakened by loss of blood. Yet Otalle refused to rest, desperate to hear every tiding of battle and skirmish. At last came the report he had dared not hope to hear. The Thurga warband was broken and put to flight across the length of the field, and most had been slaughtered, those few who had evaded capture having fled back to the nearby foothills. "We stand victorious, uncle, and against such a number," said Prince Healdred. "Praise be to Taranos." "To Taranos? Was it the thunder god who granted victory, sister son?" mused the king, grimacing at the throbbing of his wounds. "Or was it not that young warrior, with hair the hue of fire? Have him found, the one who slew Gormal. Have him found and brought before me, if he be not slain." As the king commanded, so it was done, and as details were tasked to carry safe the wounded, and yet more drawn up to bury the dead, the warrior was found and brought to an audience in the royal tent. No man of Vestolanta was he, plain enough. Fresh from the fray he stood, slathered head to toe in mud and gore, his hair a tousle of flame, his dark green eyes wild as a wolf. "What name do you bear, warrior?" asked King Otalle. "Forgive him, liege," said a scarred soldier clad in bright mail and feathered helm, who had entered alongside. "But the lad does not understand the tongue of old empire. Having not long left the land of his birth, he speaks only that which his own mother taught him, though he is learning slowly. I can speak for him if it please, for I have had dealings with his kind and know his tongue." Otalle recognised this soldier to be Sturk of Rogal, captain of the Free Company of Bruthulia, a band of hired swords who had ridden to the muster under the banner of his cousin, Eorl Creowald. "He is no Bruthulian born," observed the king. "Nay, liege," said Sturk. "I found myself short-handed after the Thurga fell upon us outside Dunhazel, and this one there did prove his worth with a blade. I took him in. Khetainian he is, wandered wayward from his own sin-born kin, a nomad of that god-accursed land. His name is Rhoye, if he is to be believed. He has carried himself well in my employ this last month or so, though he often ignores commands and fights where he pleases. Many Thurgar has he slain. If he has caused offence, liege, I will be all too glad to have him flogged. I brook no dishonour amongst the men of my free company." "He has occasioned no offence," said Orifier. "To the contrary, his valour saved my life this day, when the gods, it seemed, had all but forsaken me." The king studied the savage young wildling, as if weighing his worth. "Ask him for me, Stirk, at what village or town was he born?" The soldier translated the king's query. "He says there are none such in his homeland," Stirk conveyed, "that there is only Khetaine, the wild, and there was he born." "I see. And ask him, Stirk, how he felt in that moment, in the taking of Gormal's head." Stirk translated the king's question, then returned the warrior's terse reply. "Just," said Stirk. "True," the king nodded, as if approving both of the answer and of his own decision made. "Bid him kneel before me." Stirk frowned, as if confronted with a situation he had feared. "Liege, I will ask, of course," he stammered, bowing low. "But I fear he will not bend his knee, to you nor any other besides. 'Tis a foible of his accursed kind, for in their tradition they deem such a gesture to be a dishonour to themselves in the very soul." "Ask this wildling churl if he has not the honour to kneel before an honoured king," said Prince Healdred, seeming affronted on his uncle's behalf. Stirk translated the question. The wolfish eyes of the warrior narrowed as he made answer. Stirk seemed reluctant to grant the reply voice, but the weight of scrutiny of those royals present drove the words from him, though uttered with an anxious fear. "My liege, he says that he would not kneel, even to a god." There swelled a murmur of disquiet at such heathenry, which filled all the tent. But Orifier stilled all dissent with a raised fist, for a mighty king he reigned, much loved, much respected, and much feared. "Old traditions should be valued, even those not our own," said Orifier. "If he will not kneel, then, in honour of his valour and of our debt to him, I instead must stand." And against the grieving of his wounds and the protests of nephew and physic alike, the king battled to his feet. He drew Dramvoppen, the royal sword, from its scabbard beside his sick-bed and, raising it, placed its edge against the young sellsword's neck. Rhoye did neither flinch nor stir, apt to accept whatever fate might deal. "Too many of my loyal warriors have I lost this day," mourned the king. Then he tapped the sword from one shoulder to the other. "I dub thee Rhoye of Khetaine, sword thane of Vestulanta, in lieu the debt of mine own salvation." Orifier then paled and fell faint, and was helped back to his repose. In the scurry of care for the wounded king, the two sellswords were bidden depart the tent without further ceremony. "What just happened there?" asked Rhoye as they stood without in the chill air sweeping down from the mountains north. "Ah, your days as a sellsword are over, my lad, before they have scarce begun," said Stirk, the envy in his words plain despite his mauling of the rugged Khetainian tongue. "Our good king has just made you one of his thanes. You are pledged to him now." "I did not ask for that," said Rhoye. "Kings do not seek permission," scoffed Stirk. "They take as they please. Be grateful he did not take your head," he laughed. "Take heart, lad, this is no penance. With duty comes reward. Coin, good food, station, and of course advancement. Maybe even land given time. And with land perhaps even the hand of a comely maiden of the court, if any can stomach you." "I have no desire of any maiden's hand," said Rhoye with sudden sadness. "Girl I loved is lost. For want of her, I want no other." Stirk grunted in disinterest. He had heard sob stories enough in his time. Indeed, every man of the Free Company had his own tiresome yarn of heartbreak and woe, and reasoned thereby for his mercenary calling. And just then the captain had no desire to be burdened with yet another, when he had dead to bury and wounded to tend and coin to count. "Well, in any case, be grateful," he said. "The gods have smiled upon you this day, and there's not a single man of the free who would not gladly trade with you. 'Tis a great honour, and it would be wise to accept it as such. But you will need to get used to bending those stiff nomad knees of yours, or a fire may overlook a snub while he is faint of blood and indebted for his life. But he is a proud king, and he will not overlook forever." "I did not seek any of this," muttered Rhoye. "We'll teach you not to be so damned brave next time," laughed Stirk. "The gods have a keen eye for heroics. They find naught more entertaining than the rise of a hero, lest it be the breaking of one." He laughed again. "Come, lad, I'm thirsty. There is wine and rum to be drunk, and a count of heads to be made. Enjoy your last night of revelry with the men of the free, for tomorrow a knight will you be."